This is Claire Lewinski's book, I Need a Walk to Clear My Mind. It was published in, you'll know the answer to this, I shouldn't even be like, when was this published, Claire?
I guess it's still in the process. This
2021, this one said, 2021. So I thought, because Claire lives up here, I thought I'd ask her about her book and maybe instead of reading some things about this and criticizing her directly, then maybe we can just ask her about her process writing the book. So I guess that's my first question. Tell us a little bit about your experience writing a book and the reasons why you wrote the book, maybe the editing process, that sort of stuff.
Okay. So I wanted to write a book to tell my story, and I'll just give a little bit of background about what the book's about before we dive into how I got into writing it. So I received 3 concussions within the span of like 4 months, and it completely changed my life. I had to drop out of school. I couldn't walk or work, and really had to question how to recover and heal. And I found myself walking across the length of the South Island of New Zealand to do that. And the day after we finished, we got shut down into New Zealand's national lockdown of COVID. And during that time of lockdown, I still noticed that I was having some cognitive disadvantages, just like trouble thinking and processing my own thoughts, just lapses. I had trouble like navigating my world around me, and my cognitive therapist suggested that I go into like a non-consequential course to relearn how to learn. And I tried doing like Duolingo and like learning how to play the ukulele, and none of those stuck. And one of my friends was doing a course on how to write a book. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, I want to see if I can do that. It would be like something that like no one would care about except for me. And it would be a cool project to be at the end. I've always wanted to write a book. And so I signed up. And so I got paired kind of with like a developmental editor. And they put deadlines on like, oh, this is how you developed a storyline, and you basically just committing to writing, like sitting down and writing 2 hour sessions, like 3 or 4 times a week, just showing up and like being there consistently, and having a deadline to work towards. And it kept me on track, and it kept me just like being committed and having that critical thinking that I wasn't getting through work, and I wasn't getting through at like any other portion of my life. So I think having that editor really helped me just be consistent and push through. And then after a couple months of me writing, they're like, oh, like your storyline is actually really good. It could be quite powerful. We're connected to a publisher. And I was like, oh, like that would be really cool if I can get published. So with 2 months into this process, I had an interview with New Degree Press, and they signed me on. And so then I had more pressure of actually getting this book published, and was put on a realistic timeline, which I ended up pushing back a couple times because, well, life just happened, and I was still having problems with my head. And
you're training jiu-jitsu like a mad woman and you're always at the gym.
yeah. Well,
I feel like it's interesting because you've written this book more as a therapeutic process for yourself rather than like one of those bucket list sort of goals like I'm going to write a book. So for me, I'm like, man, I'd love to write a book, but I don't really have any interesting opinions maybe, but like I don't have a motivating reason for me to write a book. So I think that like if you're writing a book from a therapeutic perspective, that's quite interesting. And I actually think the book has come out really nice. The book is actually really nice. They've put some really nice photographs of Claire's walk in the South Island, and I think it's come out really nice. So I think that's pretty cool. But I don't feel like if I put something out into global consciousness or whatever you want to call it that would be like as interesting, I guess, as this. So that thought that was pretty cool. Um, I'll move on to the second question, which was, were there any experiences that you left out of your book?
Yeah. So the book's kind of in three parts, and I feel like the first part is kind of like a glimpse of a background of who I am, and I wish I had more time to talk about how I grew up and the place I grew up in, because it's like a small town in rural Idaho, and I think that really developed who I was as a person, and it's really unique. It's very wild. It's very rural. Like grew up hunting and fishing, and the more I've traveled, I feel like people haven't had that same experience. It's very unique and really beautiful. And I feel like I kind of glimpse over more of the traumatic experiences I've had in that small town rather than just how wonderful it was and the privileges I experienced. And then in the second part, it's more of like me healing and kind of struggling with a lot of personal connections. Um, and I feel like I had a lot of friendships and that were lost and ruined because um, they just didn't understand the support or like what I was going through. Like I couldn't really process a lot of emotions, and I would just like break down and cry, and that was overwhelming for a lot of people. And I had other friendships, just like small moments that really supported me through this journey, and they were left out. And it was like those moments I think that got me through like my hardest times.
So you think that maybe because you've approached the book from a therapeutic perspective, that sort of create a lens where you focus more on things that have caused what you needed the therapy from, rather than like a holistic approach to everything that you experienced in your childhood and your life leading up to these events.
Yeah, I think I took the time to process what I needed to more than things that are kind of just in the background of life. Yeah, and then during the walk as well, there were so many characters that I met that are like they have so many cool stories, but they didn't really contribute to my story.
I imagine you would have met some crazy hippies on that walk. There would have been,
Yeah, so many. Like there was
you
this.
do talk about a couple of people in the book that are like pretty out there sounding characters that I feel like they probably could write their own books from their own crazy perspective as well. I thought that.
Yeah, I think you have to be crazy to walk across a country.
I, I, I think we mentioned this, like we had a little conversation before we started recording, but I struggled a little bit with understanding how actually long it took to walk from the bottom of the South Island to the top of the South Island, because I sort of read it and I looked at it and I was like, I feel like this has taken you a couple of weeks when it really was actually 2 months. So
Yeah.
I feel like you almost need a double the size of your book to explain like some of the other experiences that you had during the walk, I guess. Like it's not a survival story in the sense that you're running out of food and these sorts of things. You do discuss sort of running out of water a couple of times and being attacked by sandflies and these sorts of things. But I guess like my perspective, I haven't read a book like this before where it's not just like there's been a plane crash and everyone's eating each other to survive. It's more like a mental process for yourself or something like that. So
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more subtle moments being out in nature where it's like everything slows down, and so much research has gone into like how nature is actually so therapeutic and healing, and yeah, it took me a couple months instead of 2 weeks. And
what's the average walking time for that? Because you said earlier on when we were talking that you were walking like it was your full-time job, right? You were
like 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
So I walked it with a friend, and we averaged 25 kilometers a day. So we would like get up, make breakfast, like we had our whole little routine, and just like start walking right away. We had 11Ds, lunch, a snack, and then dinner, a nighttime routine, and then just do it again all the next day. And
were there any segments of that walk that were particularly brutal? Because I know like Tongariro Crossing, there's some places called Hell Steps and things like that are just straight up a mountain basically. So in the South Island, there would be sections of that walk that were like that, right? Like straight up the mountain.
Like there's this one point, like our steepest pass is just like straight up. I think you gain over 900 meters in less than 2 kilometers. And so like you're using your hands to just like crawl up the mountain. But at that point, we were also just like in shape. So we were ready for that challenge. We were ready for that push. I would say the hardest section of the walk. So there's one day where we decided to do a night section. So we walked about 48 kilometers during the night in one go. And that was pretty much just on an abandoned road, and it was flat and just long. It was like walking on a treadmill for like 11 hours.
I think you go into the depth about that walk in the book, don't you?
But then afterwards, just because we had to walk during the night, it was just a complete other mental challenge, because you kind of destroyed your sleep schedule. And that is also when I had like the most trouble with my friend that I was hiking with. We didn't get along well after that.
It's a common problem with people who have had head injuries and things like this and concussions, is that any time that their sleep has been affected, then like everything else starts getting out of kilter. I think that's like a common problem with concussions, isn't it?
So since then my sleep schedule and my diet are very, very important to me. I'm very strict with them usually. Not last night, but usually I like make sure that I get at least 8 hours of sleep a night, because if I don't, then I still notice that it affects who I am.
Yeah. So I guess like my last question, I promised you it was only going to be 10 minutes, and just looking at that, we've already over 10 minutes. So I guess the last question is, you'd been to New Zealand a couple of times before. I think you came to New Zealand once a year, right? Before you came to New Zealand. So did your experience of New Zealand or your perception of New Zealand change before your walk to after you'd completed the walk? Did you feel like that the way that you saw New Zealand was different after you'd finished the walk, or?
Yeah, I think it changed like threefold. So I came here to New Zealand every year with my family, and I don't have the healthiest relationship with my family, but it was like the only place that we really got along. I think we were just forced to get along in a tight space, and I thought I knew what New Zealand was because we were going to these small towns, but we weren't really experiencing the culture. So I think it was really romanticized me coming back. And just, I was like, oh, I'm returning home. And then as you go through the walk, like I didn't meet really any Kiwis. There's like almost no Kiwis actually walking the South.
Yeah, I bet.
But it was beautiful to see that country because I had never been to the South Island. And to the rest of the world, that's what New Zealand is more known for. And then living in Whangarei in the Northland, and actually like working here, it's just been kind of reality has hit that it's a different culture. It's a different place. It's not just like another part of America that I had to adapt to. And
I think that living and working in a place is substantially different to just visiting a place. I know because I spent some time living in Japan, I felt it was my perception of what Japan was like was significantly different to people who just had tourist experiences. And I think that New Zealand's like that too. I think that the working environments is substantially different to like mountain walks. I think that the way people behave in businesses and it works in New Zealand are something that people are not aware of and very different to the rest of the world. I think we have a kind of a negative, pessimistic sort of work culture, I think, in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, I think you guys are more life-work balance focused, but also not ambition driven, not to like there's a lot of tall poppy syndrome here.
Yeah, I think that's a common complaint about people working in New Zealand is that they're often cut down because they're successful. So many people just end up leaving, basically. So it's very common for people to go to Australia where ambition is rewarded financially and other ways compared to New Zealand where people are cut down for being ambitious and successful. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just like searching for a job that I felt like I wanted to continue to work here, I kept getting told by people who didn't know my resume, who didn't see me work in the past, that I had no skill and like basically no desire to be here. Yeah, which was hard to hear.
Sounds like a typical sort of New Zealand position to push non-New Zealanders out of New Zealand. Not that we're xenophobic or anything, but yeah, kind of.
Even though, like, most of you are immigrants.
Yeah. All of us are immigrants. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess, like, we're heading, like, getting towards 20 minutes. Claire, where can we find a copy of this book if we want to buy it and read it?
Well, I'm still getting my identity process through Amazon, but once it's cleared, you can find it on Amazon websites, and it should be start being available in places like Barnes & Noble, if you know what that is, and maybe Costco when it comes to New Zealand, and hopefully in local bookstores coming soon.
Awesome. Thank you for your time, Claire. I appreciate that. And awesome. Ooh, I think this is week 20, week 19.